Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Haslo and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. I am so excited to get to know our new friend today. You know, usually our conversations are with people who are completely enmeshed in entertainment and in media. But when I was introduced to our friend today, his story and what he does was so fascinating. I was like, I have got to get very well acquainted with this fellow. So his name is Pete Turner, and he's spent several years as a counterintelligence spy for the US Army, traveling to many countries, including Afghanistan, Bosnia, Egypt, Germany, and Iraq. And he's now using his extensive knowledge and experience in geopolitics, tactical espionage, and US travel to provide compelling evidence outside the typical media landscapes, which brings us to his current project, a nonprofit organization called International Institute for Non-Proliferation Studies. Say that 3 times. So I want to learn all about this. I want to learn all about your organization. I want to learn about your history. But first, I just want to welcome you, Pete. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Jordan. You know, the first thing I got to say is, I run a show too, man, and I know what it means to do this and how hard it is. And just the fact that most of these shows don't survive a month, and the fact that you've been doing it as long as you have, I appreciate you doing it and having me on. That means a lot to me. So thank you for that. And I appreciate it. And the first thing I did when the IIMPS said, "Hey, Pete, come help us out," was I'm like, we're changing the name of the damn thing to the Ground Truth Center. So, so we got rid of all of those I's and the P's and everything. So it's called the Ground Truth Center. So anybody wants to look at it, look at groundtruthcenter.org.
Ground Truth Center. Okay.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay.
So
cool. So
instant rebrand. Yeah.
You heard it here first. So
that's right.
I want to talk about what you guys do there. And I definitely want to learn kind of just your journey and how you got to where you are. But I want to first start because, I think that for most people, myself included, when you hear someone's a spy, your immediate mind goes to like James Bond and fighting bad guys on the roof of trains and like falling down so you don't get hit by the train tunnel and all of that. So just tell me what is the data? What does the day-to-day look like for a counterintelligence agent?
So one of the things I can say is there is a lot of James Bond in what I do, but it's if you saw me working, you wouldn't know I was working. That's what I always tell my friends. Like if you and I went out, it would Pete's just talking to people because that's my job, right? And so when it's not James Bond, it's if I go out and I'm smashing a city to pieces with a tank driving, they don't want me to come back. And so my job is to go out and be Johnny Good Time. Like that's how I approach it, right? But there's a lot of ways to do my job. There's a lot of different subfields within it. What I do is I go into communities in war-torn places and I would talk to people and get to know folks. And so like if I came across your neighborhood in New York, my job would be to get to know people and get introduced to people and start to meet people I have no business getting to know, whether they were wealthy or dangerous, and just start to create influence there. That's what I do. And what you don't do in those cases is get into a bunch of fights and shoot people and all those kind of things. You're trying to find out what is happening in that area. I'm trying to keep people safe. I'm trying to find out what needs fixing. I'm trying to find out where there's dangers. And there's 4 things that I'm ultimately trying to do for the commander that I'm with. And that's make the commander win more, lose less, and make the enemy lose more and win less. And if I can do those things as elegantly and as efficiently as possible, then I'm good at my job. And I'm really good at my job. So that's what I do. And I don't do that by shooting people. I do that by being nice and doing shots and hanging out in the barbershop and all kinds of things like that.
You kill them with kindness.
Yeah, if possible, if they'll let me,
I love it. Was this something that you always, like, as a child wanted to do, or did your career go that way? Because I know you started off by enlisting in the Army, and I always find that really fascinating. And anytime, like, I meet someone who's served in any branch of the military, I
Yeah,
always kind of wonder, like, what got you to that place? Because in
yeah.
my mind, and thank you for your service, but I
Thanks.
remember, like, when I turned 18, and it's like, oh, by law, you have to join the selective service. My thought was, what the hell? I don't want to get shot in the face, like, so, so I'm always curious, like, when people are like, yeah, this is the journey I want to go on, this is the path I want to go on, like, what
Yeah.
prompts that?
You know, I had no idea I was going to join the military. I mean, look, everybody's family has military service that you go far enough back, and all of a sudden you find out that there was a time when all males joined some kind of service. You just got to go back a couple of
Yeah,
generations.
I think that happened up until, I think, Vietnam was probably what stopped that. Like, because I remember, like,
Yeah,
my grandfather, my great, like, but I
right.
think, you know what I mean. But like, it was kind of
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, I'm joining this. Like, I'm going into the Navy. I'm going
right.
into whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so I thought, by the time I was a kid in the 80s, it wasn't really a thing, right? And so I had never thought about joining. And so I got a college degree, but I couldn't get really a job. And so one of the ways to get experience was to join the military. So I went from never considering it really until like being in like a month. And so, because I was just stuck, I had this degree, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I can't hang around town. I didn't get a degree to hang around town. So I
What
got to
was
go
your
do
degree in?
something.
Like, what did you want to do when you
T
first went to college?
TV and radio. I was going to become a sports broadcaster. But and here's the thing that was interesting, because life pushes you in directions. And I want to say this, like, I'm going to be direct, but I'm saying this with all the delicacy. I'm being compassionate about this. The TV and media market had changed. They didn't want a bunch of white dudes coming in and wearing bad sports coats. Like, we're like, hey, we're going to hire ladies. We're going to hire people that are of other ethnicities. And so there just were less jobs because the market appropriately was changing. And so it was
Mhm.
harder to get into that gig. And I couldn't, I had to do something else. And so I looked and looked and looked, and I was like, I can't get hired. There's no way in right now. And so I had to adapt, and adapting meant joining the military, because I could probably get a job in that field, but I was done with it at that point. And
Yeah.
so they
Where did
offered
you
me
grow up?
counterintelligence.
Where
Yeah,
did you?
yeah, yeah. California,
Okay.
California. But
In
here's the
Orange
funny
County?
thing.
In Orange County?
No, in the Bay Area, like all around like Oakland and Concord, and just
I
like
noticed the
East Bay
A's.
area. Yeah, I've got an ace hat on right now. Yeah. The funny thing is when I grew up, my house, it wasn't, I didn't want to be home when my dad was home. It
Mhm.
wasn't, look, my dad wasn't a horrible dad, but he was bad enough that like a 30-70 kind of thing, but I didn't want to risk it. My dad was unpredictable and abusive. And so if I wasn't home, it was 100%, he couldn't do anything to me. And
Mhm.
so I would just be gone. And so really it turned out that I was kind of a little mini spy growing up. I would just run around and go into other towns, and like any little kid, I had my times when I was awkward and wore glasses and all these kind of things. And so if I went to another town, as I had aged out of that awkwardness, I wasn't bound by that anymore. I could just be a regular dude where people didn't know me when I was 7 and 8 and 10 and 12 years old, and so I actually was already kind of deploying myself all around these little neighborhoods, and I played a lot of basketball. And so I knew a lot of different cultures for the Bay Area, because I could go into Richmond, I could go into Oakland, and I could play basketball with a bunch of other fellas that we shared basketball, even though we didn't look the same. And so
Mhm.
I learned a lot of these things by, like, it's okay for me to be different. It's okay for me to get yelled at. It's okay for guys to come at me and try to physically intimidate me because we were playing basketball and that was part of the game. And so I learned how to be uncomfortable in different environments, which was vital to my skills as a spy, because I learned, like, hey, you can withstand this. That's part of the test, is to
Mhm.
understand that things that are different are going to be uncomfortable to you, and really what I would call is miscomfort. You will learn the comfort of this environment if you learn how to do their dance.
Right, right. So just coming in and, like, kind of figuring out, okay, these are the rules of engagement in this particular environment. Let me learn them. And then it's like, oh, I can play the game.
Right. Yeah. My dad on his good side, he was a religious guy. And so I learned a lot about music and learned a lot about the pipe organ. That's not a thing kids learn about. That's uncomfortable. He also had a deep passion for the developmentally disabled. And so I would be immersed into these special ed religious activities. And it was uncomfortable to be around all kinds of kids with various disabilities, right?
Yeah.
But I realized that there's no more loving place than in that room with all of those different people that had all these, and it didn't matter what they had. It was all something different. But and that's as uncomfortable as it can be if you're 13.
Hmm.
And I learned so many lessons there. And like that's just where all the love is. And again, like all that stuff feeds into the dude that I got to be, because if you can understand that at 13, when you're just all ego and id, that it's okay to accept someone who has Down syndrome, boy, you can really handle a lot of things.
Yeah, totally. I was laughing when you talked about the pipe organ. One of my first jobs when I was really young, I was a professional singer at this church, and the music director, he was an organist, a very
Yeah.
well-known organist in Chicago. And his day job was tuning pipe organs around
Yeah.
city. And he would call me in when his normal guy wouldn't come out, and I would assist him in tuning the pipe organs. So it's just so funny because like pipe organs aren't something that come up in
Yeah.
conversation.
Man, I love a pipe organ. I bring up pipe organs as often as I can. I think I brought them up in my show earlier today. I love them. I think they're incredible.
Well, they're just so massive, and they're so like it's just the way that they're built, and how like part of it's over here and part of it's over there. And I just
Yeah.
remember like he basically my only job would be like to hold a note while he had his little hammer and like banged. And he'd be like, "Stop!"
Yeah.
And I couldn't hear him. I was just,
Yeah.
you just brought back a really big sense memory for me.
My my great and great great grandfathers were, I guess you would call them like Kapellmeisters. They were music directors in Chicago churches, both by the way Jewish, but they worked in Christian churches, and they ran the music in those places. And so there you go. We've
There
got
you go.
roots. You and I have history.
Indeed. Indeed. So you wanted to be a sports broadcaster, wasn't working out the way that you had planned, and you're like, okay, I can't just sit around here and do anything. So
Yeah.
let's join the army.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's it.
What made you
Yeah.
choose that particular branch of service versus like the Air Force, Navy? Like what made you choose the Army specifically?
I'm kind of a guy like, okay, this is the decision. Let's just jump. And I'm kind of a jumper. And so there's a whole row of recruiters, and I went into the Army office and I talked to that dude for quite a while. And then, and by the way, my brother had joined the Marines on a delayed entry. He's quite a bit younger than me, but he was already in terms of like on contract. He was still in high school, but he was on this contract to go in. So I think I'll go check out the Marines. But honestly, I wasn't going to follow my younger brother into the Marines. Like that isn't how that works. But I did go over there, and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about joining. And the guy kind of blew me off, and I'm like, that's easy. And I'm like, I'm not going to go to all five of these off, because the Coast Guard's there too. I'm not going to go to all five of these people. Let's just cut to the chase. I'm just going to go follow this path here at the Army. They're the biggest. They'll have a job for me. And I just kind of quit looking. I did briefly talk to the Navy guy, but my mind was already pretty much made up that if I was going to do this, the Army was going to be the place for me, because it just didn't. I wasn't going to go to the Air Force, and I wasn't going to go to the Coast Guard. I'd already eliminated them just because they weren't just work. I don't know. Who knows why? Because that's just the way my brain works. So I'm like, if I'm
Hmm.
going to do this, I'm doing it with the Army, not for any other
Was it
reason
the
than that.
idea of like potentially going into combat? Like, well, I don't want to be in the Coast Guard because, like, just in terms of especially where you were, at that age, like, was that kind
Yeah,
of what
I
what?
wasn't. Combat wasn't even a thing, because we hadn't even seen any real. I mean, look, Desert Shield had happened, right? But even that wasn't like real, like heavy combat. So I wasn't in any way swayed by combat, but I was swayed by not wanting to be on a ship in the Navy and just stuck in a ship all the time. Like I didn't
Mhm.
want to be that. I didn't want to just be like stuffed in a ship, like I'm on the radio on a ship. That to me sounded like drudgery, you know. So and then when it was funny when the Army was like, the recruiter was like, hey, let's watch this video, this is what your job is. I watched it and I looked at him and I'm like, what exactly does this guy do? And he's like, I honestly don't know. So, and so he's like, but if I don't know and the number is high, it's a good job. And then I've never put anybody in this job, and you have the highest scores in my entire time as a recruiter. And I was the last guy he put in the Army. And so he's like, you're the last guy I'm going to put in the Army, and you have the highest score, and this is the highest number job. This is going to work out for you. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. And I just signed the contract. It was good, and it worked out. It was a good choice. He was right. It was a good choice.
Yeah. What was that like joining the Army? Like, you watch like Full Metal Jacket and like Officer and a Gentleman, and it's like,
yeah, I got nowhere else to go. Yeah. I had no.
Was it like a culture shock? Because I mean, going
Total.
like, I think it's because it sounds like you kind of had the freedom as a teenager to kind of like, I'm not going to be at home. I'm going to go do my own thing, to then go into this environment where it's like, this is what you do, and this is what and you do it because I say so.
Yeah, I was 24 when I joined, right? So I'd already graduated college. I had worked a lot. I was pretty adult when I joined, but I also had no idea what it was like to be in the military, and no one really could tell me because none of my peers who had really joined. So I knew nothing. And then one day I was there at basic, but I had to go back to the main part of the camp to do some administrative stuff. I forget what it was. And I saw some guys who had graduated, and I'm like, hey, what's the hardest part about basic? And keep in mind, I'm pretty physical, I'm athletic, so I'm in pretty good shape. And what I didn't know was, if you're in good shape and you can shoot straight and you got a pretty good brain, you don't got a thing to worry about. Like you'll get right through. I didn't know that time. I know like the gas chamber was the worst thing. And I'm like, holy cow. At the time in California, we just executed our first convict in a long time, this guy named Robert Alton Harris, and they killed him in the gas chamber. And I'm like, the gas chamber is where you kill people. And so I thought they were literally going to put cyanide gas into the gas chamber, and then we would have to withstand. I'm like, that thing is lethal. You can't breathe cyanide gas. And they said, no, it's CS gas. And I'm like, I don't care what they call it. You can't breathe gas. And so that was like a thing I had no idea about. And then later on,
what do they do? I have no idea what that is either. What is that?
Yeah, it's tear gas. It's like a riot control
so
gas.
Just to make you like, yeah.
And it's just to teach you that your gas mask works and that you can withstand some level of that irritant, right? And so once I realized that, look, I'm not saying it was pleasant, but it was something that you had to get through and everything else. But I will say another funny story. When I got to basic, they shave everybody's head. Everybody's got their physical fitness uniform on. And again, I'm in great shape. So we all get out there and, they say, go, run. And I'm running, I'm fast. And there's a rule, like when you run on a track, like you say track. And that means someone needs to yield, get out of the way, because you want the inside corner. Because if you're not going faster than me, you got to get out of the way. And so I'm just tracking, track. I'm one of the fastest guys in the entire company. I'm not the fastest, but I'm like top 2 or 3. And I'm cooking around, zipping around and lapping people. And there's this guy that wouldn't yield. And there's this unwritten rule that if you don't yield, I can go around and I can give you the business with my elbow. And so I go around this guy, I have to track it. If I yell track twice, you're going to get the business, right? And so it's a 2-mile run, right? And so I yell track. So he knows, doesn't say it, track one more time. All right, this guy's going to get the business. So I go up on the curb and I blast him, bam, and I go by him because that's just bad form. And all of a sudden I hear someone yelling, oh no, from the middle of the field. And I'm like, oh damn, I guess that's not allowed here in the Army. And I think I'm going to get it. And they're like, oh no, you didn't. And they're running towards me and this dude. And then I realized they're yelling at the guy who didn't yield, right? And so they stopped this guy mid-physical fitness test, and they're like, you get out of the way when someone's, and so they're screaming at this guy and just yelling at him mid. And so he's in the middle now of failing his physical fitness test because he didn't get out of the way, and they stop him and running. And I'm just cooking, and I'm just trying to get up to the next guy that looks exactly like me, so they lose track of who I am. And so I do fine on my test and everything else. It turns out that was my battle buddy. And I got him up. He didn't survive the day. He's like, you know what, this isn't for me. I want to go home. And so I hastened his departure from the Army.
Are you able to do that? Just say, yeah, this sucks, I'm going. I always thought that you couldn't. And maybe that's part of the why, like when the selective service thing happened, I was like, oh, I don't know about this.
Yeah, there's a couple of outs, and that's one. And he had been in before, and so he already was making some sacrifices to come in, and so they all made an agreement, like, yeah, this isn't going to work. You can go because they don't want someone if they don't need you, they and it doesn't work, they let you get out.
Yeah. Yeah, how's there? So with that said, so you're in the army.
Yeah.
So and clearly you're doing well and you progress. So how does your career kind of delve into the area of counterintelligence?
Yeah, I mean, so at first I go to Germany, and the job is more like strategic, where we're working on offices and we're trying to figure out what's next because we don't really have an enemy to fight per se, because Russia is not really an enemy anymore, and so everything's evolving and we're not really sure what's going to happen. And then Bosnia broke
And this
out,
is like
and all of a
oh
sudden,
okay, got it. Okay. I was about
right?
to
Yeah,
ask
so it's
like what time
yeah,
frame this is happening.
96 we deployed to Bosnia, and all of a sudden I had a real job in the field. And so we go, and every day with my team, we go outside the wire and, off the American camp and into town, and we're trying to figure out, like, is this peace accord going to hold? And there's mines everywhere, and there's all these people that have been committing genocide against each other in multiple directions, and we're trying to sort out who's bad, who's good, why, what's going to happen. And we've all believed that the peace accords were going to hold, but we didn't know, right? And so that was our mission, was help us figure out, is this thing going to work? And
Mhm.
and in that region, in some areas it didn't. Where we were, it did hold, but there was still Kosovo to sort out, and the Serbs and other areas were not cooperating. So it was contentious. Where we were, luckily it held, but maybe because we were there. If not, it was a very dangerous place to be. And so in our time, we had no idea. And so every day you're going out, you just don't know. So you've got ammo and weapons, and they've got ammo and weapons, and you go out and you just do the dance and try to find out what's going to happen next, and you just don't know. And there's not like a plan because no one
Mhm.
had been there. So everything we're doing, we're inventing right then on the spot. And it's remarkable to be able to just say, um, who do we talk to today? I have got the first clue. Like, it's like you move to somewhere. Like right now you're in New York. We're going to move you to Iowa, and you need to tell us every day what to do. How do we keep ourselves safe? And Iowa's dangerous as hell. And you're like, okay, all
Guess
right.
I'll go to the Walmart and start with the greeter. Like
Yeah, that's exactly right.
yeah.
And yeah,
What
that's right. And the greeter
what
might shoot you.
right. Well, and what is that like to live? I mean, I live on the east side for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
what is that
Yeah.
like to be in an environment where literally you might go out for a supply of food, and that could be
Yeah.
like, what is like, is it stressful, is it exciting, is it like, what does that feel like?
It's all of those things, because you need to pay attention all the time, and you're trying to understand everything, but you know nothing. And so you're trying to you're just trying to make sense of what it is that you're hearing, and what's true and what's not true, and what questions do you need to ask, and are the questions you're asking the right questions? And everybody wants to ask, everybody on our side is talking in your ear, like, hey, ask these questions. But you're like, that's not even what we're talking about outside. Shut up, leave me alone. But you have to answer
Mhm.
their questions because they're desperate to know. And so you've got to inform them in a way so that they know, like, what they need to know, because they're getting asked questions. And so you're just trying to, there's all this information is flowing around, and you're trying to improve your ability to do your job. And there's no design, right? And so it's like it's almost like you've been in an accident and you're trying to learn how to dance, and everybody's
Mhm.
screaming at you, dance faster. Why aren't you
Left foot, right
moonwalking?
foot, left
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you're like, but nobody here dances. They all fish. And you're like, fishing? What? No, dance. And you're like, I can't dance. These guys are fishing. Wait, do you understand? If I dance when these guys are fishing, it doesn't make any damn sense. Let me fish and I'll figure out how to dance while and so you're trying to explain these different dynamics to the people that you're working with, but also the people that you're living with. And so it's a very challenging thing to try to balance so that you can understand these different worlds.
Yeah, yowzer. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating. So it's like So when you're like working, when you're in that environment, is it like a regular 5-day work week, or are you just like always on and
Yeah,
always?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna like, aren't you pressured with your 5-day work week? Yeah, no, it's every day. It's every day. And then sometimes, look, like here's the thing is like you're trying to get to know people, right? So whatever the people there do, you're trying to learn. The fastest way for me to accomplish my mission, which is the commander's mission, is for me to understand how, Zlotich does his life. And if he's a farmer and he comes up with medium rare pork, guess what I'm eating? I'm eating medium rare pork. And if he brings his homemade hooch, guess what I'm drinking? I'm drinking his hooch. And so I'm going to get hammered. That means the next day when I got to get up and go on a mission and I'm one eye in it when I'm driving, that's what I'm doing, and so you're working all the time. You're prepping for the next day's mission. You're trying to understand what's going on. You're coming back and recovering from the mission you just did. We drank a lot in Bosnia, a lot, and we try to pass that around, and it is fun. I'm not going to say it's not, but it's also a challenge because you're trying to remember.
Because
You're
you have a
trying to
job to
work.
do, right? Is you're not just
Yeah,
hanging out. You
yeah,
actually-
right. Yes. And you're trying to explain that to people that you work with on the camp because they're not allowed to drink. And you come back and you're like, Pete's the one that's drunk today. Or like, and the thing is, Pete can drink, right? And so they're like, Pete, today's your day. I'm like, yesterday was my day to drink. All right, I'll drink again today. And like it sounds like, oh, Pete's complaining about drinking. But like really every day you're like, I cannot drink again today. But everybody else on my team wasn't as good at drinking. And so I often was the guy that did the drinking. But luckily, my buddy Greg drank pretty good, and so we would split that up, And
Add
it's
that
just
special skill on your resume. Get it?
can can hold his booze, right? But because the Americans get pissed if they figure out that you're drunk when you walk on the camp, and so you have to be very delicate about that.
Uh,
And we need the Americans to like us to survive. You would think that the Americans by default would like us because we're Americans and we're all in the army together, but they do not like the fact that we get to go off camp and do all the things. They think that we're, getting over and that we're not working. And it turns out we're risking our lives to keep them
yeah,
safe, but they don't know that. And so we have to find a way to do the dance with them as well.
that's so interesting. It reminds me, I spent a lot of years as a recruiter and for the studio system. And recruiting, I always felt was that same way where like you kind of have to answer to everyone. Your client is
Mhm.
the hiring manager, your client is HR. If I'm
Right.
interviewing you and you're a candidate, I have to make sure that you're having a good experience and you're just
Yep.
always kind of like tap dancing and making sure that
Yes.
everyone feels the love.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And so we have to be valuable to the camp in general, even though we owe them nothing because we're already working for them. If they don't perceive that value day to day, we get into danger. And so we need things to live and survive. And so like one of the things we did was I'm like, hey, let's throw a party. And so we went to the pig farmers because they were part of our group of people we talked to. And we said, we want to buy a bunch of pigs and have a pig roast. And we did. And so we were gathering information through the pig farmer network, but also like we built this thing where we were going to buy 6 pigs and put on an Easter pig roast on our camp. And then luckily the American officers said, hey, we love what you're doing. We're going to buy these pigs. And so they all chipped in, and it was a couple $100. And so they took the financial load off of us. And so we had this big party. And so like when the other units, they were small units, when they were like antagonistic towards us, like, hey, Pete and Greg were the ones that set this party up. They're like, oh, thank goodness. That party was the best. And so like all these little things allowed us some grace. So we were always kind of like Radar O'Reilly from MASH, we were always
Uh,
trading things like, hey, you want some prosciutto? And they're like, wait, you have prosciutto? I'm like, yeah, it's this prosciutto made here. And they're like, wait, what? And so we would like hand a guy prosciutto, be like, here you go, man. And he'd be an army guy. And he's like, hey, Greg and Peter, all right, leave those guys alone. And so we would have to curry favor. So we would use our access to the outside world to maybe sneak in a bottle or sneak in some pork or sneak in some something. So somebody had something that they didn't have otherwise. And that was how we kind of built our internal network.
it kind of sounds like prison, or at least what I've seen prison on TV.
It is a lot of ways like it's a lot like prison. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't in prison, so I don't know, but it is a lot like that where you've got these rival factions, Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
So what's it like as you're, where you're stationed and you're building these, external relationships off the base for you know, the specific goal of that the commanders, you know, like given you, like this is what we're trying to
Mhm.
do. What's it like to kind of manage um, the boundary, right? Because if you are hanging out with people, going to their
Right.
homes, drinking
Yeah.
with, I think it's only natural to, you know, regardless of if you even like them or not, to develop some kind of an affinity for them, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if we hang out for
Yeah.
2 weeks, we're gonna develop some kind of like a friendly relationship. How do you kind of balance that line of, whoa, you know, I'm really digging, you know, that we've had some really cool times, but I'm actually here for a specific reason, and I need
Yeah.
to know that that's the boundary.
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple real clear boundaries you have to have, and the second you lose track of that, you're not being professional, right? So it seems like me talking like it's all fun and games and everything, but when I got to Iraq, I was there working for a private company that held a contract with the government. So in the common parlance, you would say Pete was a contractor, right? But my job was a line item, and it's like, support counterintelligence activities. So I'm working as a non-badged counterintelligence agent, but there are no agents there. So I am the guy who's trying to fill that role for the government. And right when I got there, they hung 4 American contractors from a bridge, burned to death, right? And so you understand, like, they're playing for keeps. And so one of the boundaries I have to set is when do I have to change the game from, hey, I'll tolerate, I'm lethal, right? And there has
Mm-hmm.
to be a line. And so that line is, like, for me, like a physical circle. And if you
Right.
get within arm's reach of me and we're in any way contentious, I'm going to kill you. And it's just night and day. It's black and white. There is no compromise. Now, it doesn't mean that if I'm standing
Sounds like
we're all
Hollywood.
talking at the barber shop, right? But that's not that line. But if we're in any kind of confrontation, if people are putting hands on me and I don't like it, it's time for me to start clearing that circle out. And
Right.
then I'll put that lethal circle around me, and that's different, right? And so there's lines, and there's definitely boundaries that you have to have. By the way, and this will be kind of like the prison thing. The place where I have been the most imperiled, not life and death, but critically imperiled is by the Americans again, because they don't trust the guy that goes out and does these things for them. And so because I'm not with them, they
Mm-hmm.
don't understand what I do. They tend to be, there'll be someone who just doesn't like me. They're jealous or whatever it is. I make too much money, I'm too handsome, I'm too charming, whatever it is, right? And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
saying I don't know what they put on me, but
Right.
there's
But
something that they
there's
don't like.
something that they're like, why does he have what I don't? Or why does he get to
Right.
do this and I can't do it?
Yeah. And so they'll slide a knife in my back and start something, and I'm not there to even know about it. And then this thing will become something, and all of a sudden they're like, "Hey, Pete, you have to leave this camp. You can't live here anymore." And I'm like, "I've been kicked off the camp, you know, but
You have
I'm
been
an
booted off
American."
the island.
Yeah, literally, literally voted off the island. Yeah, yeah. And your stuff, we already went to your tent and grabbed it, and it's in that truck over there, and that truck is leaving. And you're like, Jesus Christ. All right. And so
Wow.
that's happened to me a bunch of times, because a lot of times I have bad news for them, because, again, my job is to help the commander win more and lose less. And if I'm like, hey, you're losing right now, people don't like to have their shit out like that.
Yeah.
And I have to share that information. And so these boundaries often come in with like that kind of cost. So I have to pre-soften those blows and say, hey man, I'm gonna be writing reports. Sometimes it's gonna put you on Front Street. So you have to understand, I'm gonna be out doing these things, and I want you to read my stuff so you understand that I'm always trying to help. And so I have to go out and make sure everybody understands what I'm doing. And if I don't do that, if I don't wire that machine tight, then as I'm reporting, I am undermining my own credentials and survivability internally. And I have to
Right.
always work on protecting myself and make sure the commander protects me, because if he doesn't value what I'm doing, someone's going to ice me in the staff room and I'll get kicked off the camp, sent out of theater. That's happened. You have to go home, not just home out of here, home all the way back to Florida. And you're like, wait, what? So,
Right.
yeah.
Is there a big delineage, like when you're working for like a company, like a contractor versus being in the military? And I'll make the comparison to sort of like in say the corporate world, you have employees, and then a big large part of the the staff is also or contractors or consultants, and there is a like us versus like I'll give you a perfect example. I used to work at Disney. All of the contractors at Disney, their email addresses, they're like their name and then dash ND, meaning dash not Disney. So there's like kind of like a pecking order. And like what is that like? I know a lot of people go into like the private contracting business because the money's better and all of that jazz, but is there kind of like a like where the people who are actually military are like,
Yeah, because there's that jealousy again. Like you might, there's the perception you make a lot of money, and people will ask you, "How much money do you make?" And I'm like, "What does it matter how much money I make? I'm here to help you. How much help am I giving you? Am I making your job easier? Am I working hard? Do you ever see me slack off? And that's where I always take that back to. I'm like, I have worn a uniform, and then I got out, and I'm coming back. I didn't have to come back, and they're always desperate to like understand how much you make. And I'm like, I'll tell you how much I make. But what I want you to do is let me know the second you see me slipping, and then I challenge them and I'm like, how about this? You and me, we'll go toe to toe. And the second I see you slip, I'm going to let you know. The second you see me slip, you let me know. And then we'll go product for product. And then I'll challenge them. And then if after 10 days, if neither of us has slipped, I'll let you know how much I make. And that's the kind of thing I have to do is I have to go, let's go play the game. We'll see if I'm a pro, because what really matters is, am I a pro? Am I value added here? Even if I don't work directly in your lane, am I contributing to the fight? That's really what you need to know. And then because these guys are all pros, right? But they just don't know what to do with me, right? And so that's the game I had to learn how to play. It was how to like justify, because all they're doing is just being thugs, just their version of being a thug.
Yeah.
And so I would just come in and I just learned how to hit back, because you can't come into the front and punch them in the mouth, because that gets you in trouble, right? And so I had to learn how to like say I am valuable and I'm willing to prove it. And then when I got even better, I was able to predict the future, and that's why I knew the 10-day game worked, because I wasn't going to be slipping. And I would tell them, I'm not going to lose this, so I'm going to offer you this challenge, and at best you're going to tie me, and you're probably going to lose, because here's what's going to happen. And then I would tell them, and then I would say, and then after that, if you want to know what I make, I'll tell you. So that was how it went. And then I would do the same thing with commanders, but in a totally different way. And I would predict the future, and I'd be like, yeah, you told me you were going to do that, and you did it, and I need more people like you. And so that's how I learned how to protect myself internally, was by building trust, by addressing the thing that I thought that they needed, that they didn't have from me, that I couldn't give them without getting time to show them that my reputation that they couldn't know, because we don't have like a button that says pizza badass. Like there's no pizza badass sticker. Right? I have to say, yeah, I've got to say pizza badass.
Like the
It'll take you 10 days.
What do we know about this guy?
Yeah. Like I don't have a beret. I don't have any of these kind of things. I have to say pizza badass. It's going to take you 10 days to see it. And then you and I can get along, right? That's basically the contract I had to sign with them. And so that gets rid of that not Disney tag on who I am. Otherwise, you're just a stupid contractor. Even if I actually was a member of the federal government, they would just assume, they would put themselves in this bad spot. And I used to smash them with that. Like, you've made an assumption about me. You didn't know anything about it. And I would be right, but I would lose the fight, because it didn't matter if I was right. What mattered was, why did I have the ability to show them that I was a badass?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So
yeah,
this sounds so incredibly stressful of an occupation.
Like, oh my God.
It's like you're like, you leave the base and you might get shot and you might get alcohol poisoning. You come in, you come into the base, you have to, everything's like a pissing contest to like get everyone calm. So in these stretches, like how long of stretches would these be? And what do you do when you're there to be able to, like, I can't imagine you're able to like my stressor, like I like on Sunday mornings to read the New York Times and drink a Bloody Mary. Don't imagine that you can do that when you're there. So how do you, being basically in this environment where every single moment you have to be aware, alert, cognizant of all of your senses, always in the ready to potentially battle. How do you unwind in that environment?
I'm still learning how to do it. You know, if I'm not occupied all the time, you know, I'm like, oh man, right now, who do I need to be talking to? Who do I need to be networking with? You know, it's kind of burned into who I am now, right? Like it's part of my wiring, and it's a significant exercise for me just to sit back and read the New York Times and have a Bloody Mary. I can do those things, but that's work for me,
Right,
and
because then
so
you're
I have
also,
to say.
well, I should be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've gotten a lot better at it, but it's taken me a long time. So yeah, it's so I would for a long time I was wild, wild. Like look, I was already wild because I was on my own self-starter and I didn't need anybody to direct my work because they couldn't. They didn't know how to do my work. And so that gave me this independence that was hard to, again, hard to understand, right? I had to teach people how to leave me alone, but also how to guide me, right? And so that took a long time to learn that language. And then when I would go home, God, who who would know how to manage me? I mean, I would hate to have been my boyfriend during certain eras of my life because I must have just been like terrifying to be my boyfriend, you know. And I would get let loose. I would have money, you know, and just not have any idea where to place normal things in front of my life, you know. So yeah, it's very challenging. And you cannot get off the accelerator when you're deployed because you're playing for keeps every day. And by the way, my job, like my favorite thing, I bet you'll have something for this, Jordan. So in my world, the two shop is where the intelligence happens, right? And so I would wait for someone in the two shop to come up. And again, I want people there to know me, right? And so I'm always Pete. I never lie about who I am, because if you lie, then I'm not being truthful, and people talk about you. So I want people to know who I am, the enemy, my friends, and my folks in town, right? And so I want that person to come running up, Pete, we've got message traffic. The Taliban know who you are. They've targeted you. They want to target and kill Pete. And I'm like, yes, good. That means I'm on the field. I'm playing the game. That
You're
means
in it now. Now you're in
I
it.
am, yeah, right,
Off
right.
bench
Now
and
they know
on,
who I am.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's important. Now that they know I'm out there, now I'm like Ray Lewis. Now I'm out there and I'm hitting people. And look, I'm not hitting anybody, but I'm making a difference. And so now that I'm out there, okay, well now you're really going to feel me because I'm really going to be going out. Now I'm going to step on the accelerator even more, you know, and really start to pull on my strings. And now that I'm having an impact, we're going to start measuring that impact, and I'm going to learn how to really start to hit harder now because I exist. I'm in the game.
Yeah. Would you compare it? This is just hearing the way you talk about it. Would you compare it to like a drug, and that drug being like the adrenaline, like
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of needing that, or
Yeah. I don't want to say no to that, but I don't want to say yes either. I wasn't addicted to the action, but the action is there. You are up all the time because you have to be, and you're pushing yourself beyond your limits. And so there is some of that. And it does feel great to matter and to be influential in an organization that is doing something you think is really important. All of
Mhm.
that is vital. And you miss it when you don't have it, for sure. I wouldn't say that's adrenaline like jumping out of an airplane though. Like I can jump out of an airplane and I'll be like, meh, all right, been there. Yeah, that's nothing. So there
Not
is some of that in
adrenaline,
that.
like performing, right? Like when
Yeah, it is
I'm
like
doing a
performing.
show, it's like, oh my God, I'm on stage. This is wonderful. Fuck, when do we do another show? I need to be back on stage. Like that kind of a
Yeah,
thing, like that
yeah,
hot.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There is a lot of that. There is a lot of that.
Yeah.
And you the stakes are so high, right? And you are just so aware of everything, right? And you're doing it great. And you're really, and you know you're great at it. And then your peers are like, whoa, man, you are really doing great work, you know? And so there's that recognition from your peers that you're doing something. And then your peers become the Afghans. And the Afghan leaders are like, Pete,
Hmm.
wow, you're really helping me do my job better. And that's a different level, you know, when your Afghan become your peers and your Iraqi generals become your peers. And they're like, Pete, I need your advice on this. And so that kind of stuff, like that's you're not going to hear other Americans talk about this where they're like, I need my advisor and his name is Pete. Get him in here. You know, that kind of thing is you don't get to that level very often. You don't hear many people talk about it like that because it's very rare to attain that level of trust reliably and repeatedly with people outside of the camps.
Yeah. Well, when talking about outside the camps and level of trust, you said the other day, like, or the other, you just recently said,
Yeah.
oh, I'm Pete and I'm gonna be Pete. As you're like going out into the world and the environment that you're assigned to, like, are you, I'm Pete, I work for the US government, or is
Yeah.
it more like, the spy movie, I'm Pete,
No,
I'm a
no, I'm 100% honest. I'm 100% honest. And if they ever said they're like, are you a spy? I will say, yes, I am. And then I'll say, if I ask you a question you don't want to answer, don't answer it, because I'm here to help people. And I only ask questions if I think I can help somebody. And I'm never going to force anybody to do anything. And they're like, all right, yeah, I'm always honest about it. Yeah.
Well, I
It,
imagine
it,
because
it's
it's kind of cool to be a spy. Like I imagine there's a bit of intrigue there too. It's like, wait, he's a spy.
Yeah. Well,
A
and
spy.
by and large, most people don't believe me anyhow when I say it, right? Like if I used when I lived in Vegas and I had two jobs. I was a spy and I was a Captain Morgan model, right? And if I said that to any girl in a bar, they're like, "Yeah, bullshit." And it was always true. And I'm like, I can't prove either one of these things to you, but they're both true.
I love it. When were you in Vegas?
The mid aughts, I would come home from being overseas, and then I would work and do that. I would try to stay home, but I couldn't make enough money being Captain Morgan model. I worked for a golf magazine too, and so
Uh-huh.
I would do that. But yeah, I would be home, and then Diageo was the brand that owns Captain Morgan. But
Mhm.
they're like, hey, go to this location and be Captain Morgan. So they had like this costume they gave me, and I'd run around, and I would do all the approved Captain Morgan things. But yeah, like those are two jobs that no one ever believes you that you're that thing. And so yeah, I'd be like, yeah, I go to Iraq and I do spy work, and like, whatever, you're making that up. And I'm like, what if it was true? And they're like, it's
That's
not true.
hilarious.
All right.
That's like one of those like say three things and name one that's not true. I'm a
Yeah.
spy. I'm a Captain Morgan
Uh-huh.
model,
Right.
and I work at a
Yeah.
bank. Which
Yeah. Yeah. You work at a bank, and I'm like, that's the lie. I didn't. Yeah.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
So always having to be like conscious of your surroundings. Like I don't know
Yeah.
if you're married, I don't know if you have children, but
Mhm.
I would imagine, or even your friends, I would imagine you might be a bit of a terror because I would imagine you notice everything and you remember everything and
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to act like I wasn't, because I tried my best to not do that. And one of the things I realized early on, before I really got like sophisticated with, and I'm saying sophisticated, I was primarily a primate most of the time, but I would try to dominate conversations and force my friends through my skills to do things for me, and I'm like, what am I doing? Oh my God, because I can compel people to do things, right? When I got better, when I got really great at it, I didn't have to control conversations anymore. Like, I'm not trying to control this conversation at all. I'm just being open about the conversation. But if I chose to, I could pull some levers and I can make things happen. I've always found that the less I do that, and the more I am, there's technique in my no technique. It's very much like Bruce Lee, right? Like, where I'm not using a
Mhm.
technique, and my technique is within that no technique, and I'll get something that I need. I just need one thing. And once I find that one thing, then I can polish that one thing up and be like, bam, that's something that nobody else has. That goes in my bag. I'll write a report about that. And I know
Yeah.
I'll always find something, right? And so uh, once I got good at that, I could relax a lot more about having to control every conversation, and to stop practicing on everybody I met, and I became a lot more, I believe, you can ask my friends, I became a lot more tolerable about all that stuff. But again, there are other problems that I had, and this job collects sociopaths and psychopaths, and people that can disassociate. And there for sure is some of that in me, because you have to talk to murderers. You have to talk to people that are bigger sociopaths and psychopaths than I am. Because you have to do that. You have to be able to push yourself beyond your social and physical and mental limits to do this job. You have to.
Yeah.
And there's damage in that, and that damage is felt by the people that you love.
Two quick questions for you because we didn't get a
Please.
chance to talk about your organization. Tell us where we can find out more about you and your organization, and just kind of a little bit about what exactly it is you all do with your new name that's not a tongue twister.
Groundtruthcenter.org. And what we do is we're trying to close the loop. People like me that have done things on the ground, we're trying to connect the policymakers, the politicians, the legislators, the academics who come up with the theory. And we're going to say, hey, that's the theory. Here's how this applies on the ground. And let's get a little more accurate. Let's waste a little more money. Let's try to reduce the corruption. And in my world, originally, I thought this applies to combat, but it actually applies to any kind of thing. Like we have, obviously, we have a homeless problem. We have drug problems. I learned this from Allison, the girl who played Nellie Olson on Little House on the Prairie. She was saying she was doing casework for during the AIDS epidemic, and she was saying this is exactly what happened to me. We had all this stuff from the National Institute of Health for all the men in West Hollywood, and it was like, hey, don't do unprotected sex acts, and I'm being like not like crass or anything here. And I'm like, yeah, that's ridiculous. Of course they're gonna, like that's their life. You can't just say don't do it. And she's like, yeah, I had to find a whole new way of explaining this to people, right? So you take Allison, who's on the street trying to help reduce the spread, and then you have this policy way up that makes no sense in West Hollywood. How do you short circuit that distance so that Allison's mission is in some way connected to the policy? And at the Ground Truth Center, we're going to connect Allison to the policymakers so that they can slow down and figure out how to provision Allison in a way so that her input is used when they make that policy happen, so that it's not just here, hand them this card that has a circle through to dos or whatever. It's like that ain't gonna cut it, right? And it's the same thing, like, and I'm using that example because I think we can all resonate with that, because you're telling two people that have this primal urge to not have a primal urge. It's like telling an addict, hey, you just don't love your kids if you don't do if you do drugs. You're like, well, they have an addiction, they have an illness. You're telling them to hit rock bottom. Tell that to the cancer patient. As soon as you hit rock bottom, then we're going to treat you. Like that isn't, these things don't go together. So it's the same thing with combat and all these other kind of things where we think we know the answer, but we get our priorities wrong. And that's what the Ground Truth Center is trying to accomplish.
So kind of making that connection with like, okay, these are the actionable steps to this overarching strategy. These are the actionable steps to truly implement it versus just let's talk in hyperbole or let's talk in generalizations and vice versa.
And honestly, sometimes I'm making an uncomfortable face. Sometimes the priority of the academic is not appropriate. And the example I keep using, and I've written on this academically, is, we go abroad and we export our problems. And so we are desperate to empower women, but we are not desperate to become professional at that. We don't go out and earn the right to engage people's women. And so we'll go to some Afghan village and invent the period and teach women how to deal with that. You don't think that they already have mechanisms for that, and we'll tell them they can go to college. And the reality is we have no business engaging women until we've earned the right to do that. And we don't. And so then we leave and we've endangered these women and we get them hurt. And so these priorities, like, it's fine to go out and do that at some point. And I'm not saying that women aren't an important part of society. They're absolutely vital, but it's so important that you have to actually do the damn work to be appropriate in your approach. And we don't bother with that. And that's where the Ground Truth Center comes in and says, hey, before you ever do that, stop, talk to actual anthropologists who actually have done this work. And you know what they're going to tell you? That's not your job. Don't do that. And so that's it. That's the nuts and bolts of it. You slow down, get things right, And
in explaining your new title, the new company name makes so much sense as opposed to the international geopolitical. Again, it went from very academic to
totally.
What does the shit do? What's on this? Like, what's in the can? Like, just
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I have one final question for you.
Hit me. Go ahead.
You play the guitar?
I do.
A musician? I see the guitar behind you.
Yeah, I can play the guitar. Yeah.
What do you normally noodle with? What do you sound?
I play like some country songs, like a little bit of Johnny Cash, a little bit of Willie Nelson, a little bit of U2 though also. And I try to play well enough that I can sing along with it, and so you know, I'm not very good. I like a campfire player, basically. You know, I like to
Yeah.
do that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, Pete, it's been such a pleasure getting acquainted with you. Your story is so good.
Likewise.
I could totally continue talking for another couple of hours, but we do have sponsors, thank heavens. And so we're gonna go to them. Thank you very much again. And thank you all out there in Radio Land. We'll talk to you next week on Showtime with Jordan Van Hassel and Friends right here on Hot 702.5 FM, Las Vegas.